One thing I love about my job is the amount of opportunities I get to learn. In my coaching sessions, as I work with my clients to enable them to get over the barriers, enable them to work towards their goals, there's some very interesting conversations we end up having in those sessions that also a highlight for me to cover for myself. So I just want to share one anecdote with you. This happened in one of my recent conversation with a leader. And we were talking about the area that the leader wanted to work on is how do I stop myself from getting triggered into behaviors I don't want to display. And in this case, it was a particular gentleman in an organization that triggers him to get angry and triggers him to get short-tempered and respond immediately. So as we were working on the scenario, it was not so much on the person who was triggering him, it was more on what was causing him to get triggered. And as we were doing this, there was a very funny experiment we came across. And in my coaching sessions, what we do is we work on the whys and hows and where is that coming from, and then we end with what experiment you want to do after the session in this particular situation. So the experiment that came about was whenever that person came in front of my client again in the organization, he would imagine that person to be one big cortisol bottle. And the reason we picked up cortisol is my client is also into fitness and into health, and he really understands this industry and enjoys working on his own health and self-care. So as we were talking about the implications of this trigger and what happens to his body and how he reacts in anger, we also started talking about the chemicals that happens in the brain and how that gets spreads in the body, and that causes the reaction of fight that happens. And if you're familiar with the fight and flee, you would understand where the amygdala hijack comes from. So once we understood the science behind it and what causes it, the big question was, how do we now stop that from happening? And we all know science and information and knowledge is not the only way to change behavior. It is about making that change happen, doing it and cracking it at the first go. So we come up with this wonderful experiment is every time my client sees a gentleman, he imagines that cortisol bottle. He imagines him drinking cortisol. And what cortisol does in your system, it creates a lot of stress, and a lot of stress creates a lot of negativity, and the negativity starts dropping your immune system, which catches a lot of diseases, then in the end not very good for you. So every time he sees his colleague, he imagines a cortisol bottle, and he imagines if I engage with him the way I usually do, I am drinking that whole cortisol into my system. So at the end, I'm harming myself physically and mentally and chemically, and not so much harming my colleague. And this was a wonderful realization in a coaching session, and how A, the awareness of what this does to me in my body chemically, and B, how I can go ahead and stop myself from doing that going forward. So fast forwarding in our next session when we talked about, so how was the experiment for you? Were you able to do it? What was the outcome? And my client was really happy and funny about it. He says every time he would appear in front of me, I would actually imagine that bottle. And when I imagine that bottle, I internally start laughing because the image is so funny. And because the image is so funny, that stops me from what I usually would have reacted whenever he would speak up or he would say. So that was a wonderful example and experiment for him to take forward. And we thought, let's do that for more opportunities. And as I got over my session with him, I said, that's very interesting. Let me see where I can use this cortisol bottle in my life. Who are the people who trigger this bottle within me, that trigger me opening this bottle and drinking it in my system? And how I can be aware of that. So keep a picture of that cortisol bottle in front of you when you see that person who triggers you, and imagine yourself in my client's position, how he would react to it. How would you react in that situation, and how you want to take that forward. So all the best in trying it. Would love to hear your comments if you tried, or if you have another brilliant idea to share. How do you react in situations that causes stress and stress that causes anger, and what do you do about it? I look forward to hearing from you.